Good morning. I'd like to welcome you back to our second Anchored in the Word morning reflection for the week. And we are in Luke chapter 16, looking at verses 1 through 13. And we're talking about the concept of a biblical view of stewardship. And this morning what we're going to do is we're going to focus our attention in on the parable that Jesus taught. And it's a very fascinating parable. It's one that would be easily confusing if we don't dig into it. And then look at what Jesus says after the parable to help us to understand his intent behind it. And so let's go ahead and take our Bibles out, please. Let's turn to the text, Luke chapter 16. We'll read through the first half of this, and then we will focus in on the details of the parable so that you just explain what Jesus is teaching there. And then we're going to pose a question at the end. What's his point? And we're going to get into that. So Luke chapter 16, verse number 1 says this. And he said also unto his disciples, There was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him, that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, How is it that I hear this of thee? Give an accounting of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Then the steward said unto himself, What shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig, to beg I'm ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. Now, let's dig into the parable piece by piece so that we can understand what Jesus is saying. Understanding what is important before we can understand why. And so the first detail we find in verses 1 through 8. There's a certain rich man who had a steward. He was accused that he had wasted his goods, and he called him and said unto him, How is it that I hear this, that give an accounting of thy stewardship? The man in Christ's parable had an unfaithful manager, and we see that in verse 1. He had a steward which was accused of wasting his goods. And when he discovers that his manager is lazy, he demands a full disclosure of the work that he has done. He wants the books to be opened, and he wants to see how the man has used his time and whether or not he has actually received the money that was owed to the wealthy man, so that he was doing his job properly. And so we see that in verse 2. He says, Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest no longer be steward. Now, it appears that he might be leaving the door open to the fact that perhaps the man has been falsely accused. And so he's going to inspect the accusation that's been brought, and then based on that, make a determination about the man's future. Now, since the manager was dishonest and lazy, he needed to figure out a way how to prepare himself for the inevitable. As soon as the master opens the books and he looks at the work that has been done, or should I say not been done, he's going to be upset. And he's going to kick the man out of his job. He's going to lose his opportunity. And then he's going to have nothing. And we see this communicated in verses 3 and 4. He says, What shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig. To beg I'm ashamed. I'm resolved what to do when I'm put out of the stewardship, so that they may receive me into their houses. So the question we should all ask is, well, what is the man's plan? How is he going to be received after he loses his job? Well, here's the answer. He's going to use the temporary authority that he has to settle the debts that are owed to the master at a reduced rate, and his desire is that maybe the debtors to the employer will be kind to him after he's fired and left with nothing. He's hoping to make friends of the people who owe debt, and he's going to do it by reducing the debt. We see this in verses 5 through 7. So he calls every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto them, the first, How much owest thou of my Lord? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said unto him, Take thy bill, sit down quickly, write 50. Then he said to another, How much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and write fourscore. So in both situations, he's reducing the debt. And he's not reducing it equally. With the one person, he cut off half of the debt. The other one, he cuts off 20%. But his desire is that this person will be happy with him, and the next person will be happy with him. And though he has nothing, these people will show kindness to him because he has reduced their debt, though he really did not technically have the authority to do such a thing. And so his employer commends not his righteousness and not the fact that he's done the right thing. He has cheated his master, but he commends the shrewdness of this plan to protect his future. And so that's what we see in verse 8. The Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. And that word wise in the context means that he was shrewd. It was worldly wisdom, not godly wisdom. It's not that he did the righteous thing. He did the thing that protected himself. In the same way that during an election season, people will get up and they'll make promises, and everybody knows there's no way that they're going to fulfill these promises, or they change their mind about things that are unpopular so that they can cater to a certain audience to get the votes that they need. In the same way that people will do that because of a lack of principle, this is exactly what the man was going to do. And so we would say in the political season, that's politically expedient. It's not honest. It's not righteous. It's not just. It's shrewd. It's politically expedient. That's what this man is doing here. And so the question is, well, what is Christ's point with this unusual parable? Is Jesus teaching that we're supposed to be unjust stewards, that we're supposed to follow this kind of wisdom, I put that in quotes, a worldly wisdom? Well, the answer is, of course, that's not what he's teaching. He's not encouraging us to be unjust. We will know what he's teaching by seeing what he says after the parable has been given. His commentary on the parable is going to drive us to why he teaches this. And what we're seeing is that Jesus is going to draw this comparison. And it is very common in the Proverbs that comparisons are done in such a way. Sometimes you'll have something that's stated and then the exact opposite will be stated. And by looking at the two opposites, you understand the principle. Or sometimes you have something that is good and something that is an expansion of that good. And sometimes you'll have something that is an explanation of that good. Well, in this particular situation, Jesus is drawing a contrast. He's saying if a person who is unjust and unwise and foolish and doing what he's doing, if he's smart enough to protect his future, why aren't godly people smart enough to protect their future? That's really where Jesus is going in the parable. And we're going to look at that, Lord willing, tomorrow so that we can break this down and see exactly how Christ applies that. So I hope that you have a great rest of your morning. And if this has been an encouragement to you, take a moment to share that and perhaps share that with someone who can be benefited by it. And I hope that you come back tomorrow because we're going to start getting into the nuts and the bolts as to why Jesus taught the parable the way that he did. Have a great rest of your day. Lord willing, we'll meet again tomorrow. Bye now.